Hey folks, today I'm going to pick up where we left off in this Lewis and Clark book. I didn't get time to do a full video, so this might be just a quick, short little video, but let's see what we can do. Let's jump right in. So this is where we left off. We're at chapter 5, and I'm not reading this whole book. I'm just sort of flipping through, showing some pictures and reading some of the little boxes. And this chapter is called Into the Unknown. And it has a little map up here, which you can kind of see. See if I can keep the shadows out. As the explorers traveled through territory unknown to any other white men, they saw flora and fauna that no European had encountered before. The Corps painstakingly recorded their observations for posterity and for their own knowledge. And that's referring to these trees and these tree roots here. And in terms of this map, where we show present-day North Dakota, Montana, going through Fort Mandan, which we talked about in the last video, following along this river. And there's the Yellowstone. And this is the Milk River up there. I'm not sure exactly which river. Oh, that's still the Missouri. Okay, so they're still following the Missouri along here to Great Falls. And then they drop down to present day, Three Rocks. From Fort Mandan to Three Forks, I think I said Three Rocks. From Fort Mandan to Three Forks was one of the most pleasant sections of Lewis and Clark's journey. No whites had ever traveled this portion of the Missouri River, which often seemed a paradise to the American explorers. And this illustration here looks like it's showing the party hunting. This illustration from Patrick Goss' published journal shows one of Lewis and Clark's numerous encounters with grizzly bears. It also shows that the men quickly learned to put as many bullets as possible into a grizzly as fast as they could fire them. It sometimes took a dozen shots to kill an adult bear. There's an encounter with a bear. Here's a little excerpt. I think I'll read that after. Let's look at this. Let's see what this picture talks about. The first adult grizzly bear Lewis and Clark encountered was a sobering sight. It stood over 7 feet, 2.1 meters tall, weighed 500 or 600 pounds, 225 to 275 kilograms, and took 10 bullets to kill. It was a most tremendous-looking animal, wrote Meriwether Lewis. I'll read this little, looks like an excerpt from Meriwether Lewis's journal. June 14th, 1805. I selected a fat buffalo and shot him very well through the lungs, while I was gazing attentively on the poor animal, discharging blood in streams from his mouth and nostrils, expecting him to fall every instant and having entirely forgotten to reload my rifle. A large white, or rather brown bear, had perceived and crept on me within 20 steps before I discovered him. In the first moment I drew up my gun to shoot, but at the same instant recollected that she was not loaded, and that he was too near for me to hope to perform this operation before he reached me. as he was then briskly advancing upon me. It was an open, level plain, In short, there was no place by means of which I could conceal myself from this monster until I could charge my rifle. And this map, there's a description of this map on the previous page. Let's read about that. Clark's map of the falls in the portage of the Missouri shows that the falls were actually a series of falls and rapids extending miles along the river. The portage route, shown by a dotted line on the left-hand side of the map, left the Missouri below the falls and rejoined it above them, after crossing almost 20 miles of rocky, cactus-strewn desert. So they would take this boat, bring it on shore, and then drag it for 20 miles, and then put it back in the water. As the journals of the Missouri upper right and Marius upper left rivers, the expedition faced the greatest dilemma in its first 13 months of travel. Which stream was the true, genuine Missouri? A mistake here could have been fatal, so the expedition spent several days scouting the two rivers before making a decision. Below, the upper falls that William Clark sketched in 1805 is now known as Black Eagle Falls. So I guess this is the sketch here. The modern name recalls the fact that for many years an eagle nested in a cottonwood tree on the small island shown in Clark's sketch. The Hidatsa used this eagle's nest as a landmark in describing the falls to Lewis and Clark, and Clark noted it in his journal, though not on his sketch. And this is showing them porting the boats across the land. In an effort to ease the burden of carrying their boats and equipment around the falls, members of the expedition built wheels on which to roll the canoes. They also raised the boat's sails one day and took advantage of the strong wind that was blowing. According to Sergeant Ordway, this is sailing in dry land in every sense of the word. They show that sail there on that canoe. Now, my understanding is some of these boats were quite big. These in this illustration aren't that big, but my understanding is some of these boats were quite big. And they had a lot of freight on them. So that would have been a heck of a thing. Here's another illustration of falls, and then this looks like a photograph of one of the falls, and to see if it matches the same spot. Looks like not a great place to take your boats off of, especially those boats, the type of boats that they had. Handsome Falls, Clark wrote, was slightly less awe-inspiring than the Great Falls, but more pleasingly beautiful. After comparing the two, Clark decided if a skillful painter had been asked to make a beautiful cascade, that he would probably have presented the precise image of this one. Today, Handsome Falls is known as Rainbow Falls, and the view includes a dam and bridge that Clark never saw. Over here is this drawing. The Great Falls of the Missouri was a sublimely grand spectacle when William Clark sketched it in 1805. On the left side of the falls, water fell in a smooth, even sheet, while on the right it passed over rocks and broke into a perfect white foam, which assumes 1,000 forms in a moment. It was, wrote Clark, the greatest sight I had ever beheld. That painting looks familiar. Make sure I get that painting in the frame. Though it took some time for the members of the Lewis and Clark expedition to find the Shoshone, it is entirely possible that the natives saw them long before the white men saw the Indians, as illustrated in this Charles M. Russell painting. So that's probably why it's familiar. That's a Charles M. Russell painting. He's a famous painter from this period. I think we can maybe do one more. We can flip through one more chapter. This one's called Across the Divide. That's a pretty part of the river there with all that rocks with moss. And let's see what it says about that. Parts of the Salmon River today look much as they did when Meriwether Lewis described it in 1805. Quote, the river is very rapid and shoaly. Many rocks lie in various directions scattered throughout its bed. The tops of the mountains on the Lard side are covered with pine, and some also scattered on the sides of all the mountains, end quote. And then this map, so now here's where they stopped with Three Forks, and now they're going to proceed west through Lemhi Pass, following this river, Salmon River, for a while. And there's the Bitterroot Mountains, Montana, Idaho. Here's the Snake River. And it says, crossing the Rockies from July to September 1805 was certainly the expedition's greatest ordeal. After trading with the Shoshone for horses, the men spent nearly a month clawing their way through the Bitterroot Mountains. There's a lot of tales of immigrants struggling at the Bitterroot Mountains. The later immigrant trail would have been south of this area, would have been more in Wyoming, at what they call South Pass, which was actually a relatively easy crossing of the Continental Divide. And on this side, we have more notes and illustrations. It says, Lewis and Clark were first-rate ethnographers. Their journals contain detailed descriptions of Indian customs. In this entry, for example, Meriwether Lewis described Shoshone pipe smoking etiquette and sketched a Shoshone pipe. Looks like a painting of the expedition. Let's see what it says. This modern painting of Lewis and Clark captures the popular image of Sacagawea as the expedition's guide. That role, however, was confined to western Montana and eastern Idaho, where Sacagawea grew up. Elsewhere, she was just as ignorant of the geography as Lewis and Clark were. Here's a little section I'll read about Sacagawea. She is one of the most recognizable women in American history, but we really know very little about her, not even her name. Meriwether Lewis wrote her name Sacagawea to John Ordway. She was Sacagawea. And modern writers have employed both Sacagawea and Sacagawea, in addition to the now preferred Sacagawea. The name may have been Hidatsa, meaning bird woman, or Shoshone, meaning boat launcher. And if it was Shoshone, may have been given to her at birth or when she returned to her people with Lewis and Clark. We have no idea what she looked like, nor do we know for sure where she went after leaving Lewis and Clark, when she died, or where she died. Probably in South Dakota in 1812, though some maintain that it was in Wyoming in 1884. What we do know is that she was born among the Lemhi Shoshone in what is now Idaho or western Montana about 1788. Some 12 years later, about 1800, she was captured near Three Forks, Montana by a Hidatsa raiding party and taken back to North Dakota. There, Toussaint Charbonneau bought or won her from Hidatsa in 1804 and made her one of his 2 wives. Early the next year, she gave birth to her first child, a boy named Jean-Baptiste, and headed west with Lewis and Clark. For the next 20 months, this teenage mother with an infant son traveled with Lewis and Clark. She fulfilled a number of significant roles for the Corps of Discovery. She was certainly important as an interpreter and mediator among the Shoshone, and as an interpreter among other western tribes such as the Nez Perce, holding Shoshone prisoners. She also played a limited role as a guide when the Corps moved through the area around Three Forks, and according to Clark, she provided a reassuring sign to Indians along the way that the Corps of Discovery was not a war party. Sacagawea may not have been the indispensable girl guide of legend, but she was a valuable member of the Corps of Discovery. Over here we have rapids in a river. The rapid and turbulent waters of most of the Salmon River were a great disappointment to Lewis and Clark. They had hoped to canoe down the Salmon to the Columbia, but reluctantly decided it was too dangerous to risk. Walking along a ledge in the rain is this painting. Let's see what it says. Both men and horses suffered terribly on the Lolo Trail. Though the calendar said it was still summer, winter was descending on the bitter roots. Food was in short supply. The men often awoke to frozen moccasins, and the heavily loaded animals had to negotiate a steep, narrow trail from which several fell. Well, that's a pretty picture there. Some fall colors and snowy mountains. The Rockies. Lewis and Clark were nothing like the Rockies. Let me start over, sorry. The Rockies, Lewis and Clark learned, were nothing like the Appalachian Mountains with which they were familiar. The Rockies were taller and more rugged than the Appalachians and were often covered with snow by early fall. And here's a little box which is an excerpt from William Clark's journal, September 15th, 1805. From this mountain I could observe high, rugged mountains in every direction as far as I could see. With the greatest exertion we could only make 12 miles up this mountain, and encamped on the top of the mountain near a bank of old snow about 3 feet deep, lying on the northern side of the mountain, and in small banks on the top and level parts of the mountain. We melted the snow to drink and cook our horse flesh to eat. William Clark. I think we'll end this video here and pick up with this chapter next time when they make it to the coast. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it relaxing. If you like the video, please tap the like button or icon. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I hope you subscribe. If you're already a subscriber, thank you. And most of all, thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next video.